After making peace with the Ottoman Empire, the Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, Leopold I, focused on strengthening his power by pursuing a policy of counter-reformation in the controlled part of Hungary, which of course caused serious discontent among the local Protestant Hungarians, who in 1678, led by Emmerich Thököly, raised an uprising and established control over the territory of Upper Hungary. Realizing that further pressure on the Protestants would not lead to anything good, in 1680 Leopold I was forced to conclude a truce with Thököly, and a year later the emperor convenes a special congress, which invites the Hungarian Protestants to restore local autonomy, as well as to ensure religious tolerance, but it's already late. Emmerich Thököly categorically refused to attend the congress organized by Leopold I, and instead turned to the Ottoman Sultan with a proposal to jointly fight against the Holy Roman Empire. The unexpected appearance of a new ally, of course, delighted the Sultan, who in 1682 recognizes Emmerich Thököly as his vassal and promises protection from the Holy Roman Empire. Taking advantage of the favorable situation, the Ottoman Sultan Mehmed IV decided not to wait for the completion of the peace signed with the Holy Roman Empire, but instead began hasty preparations for the upcoming hostilities. The Ottoman army, led by the Grand Vizier Kara Mustafa Pasha, began the campaign in the spring of 1683 and already on May 3 reached the outskirts of Belgrade and began moving towards the then Austrian capital city of Vienna. At the same time, the Crimean Tatars were moving along the Danube River to unite with the army of Emmerich Thököly and after that, together with the main Ottoman army, attack Vienna. It should be mentioned that the Ottomans initially planned to occupy the city of Győr before a direct attack on Vienna, but because of fears that the siege could drag on, it was decided to attack the Austrian capital as quickly as possible in order not to allow Leopold I to gather enough forces to defend it. When the Ottoman army approached, Charles V of Lorraine, together with the main forces, left the vicinity of the city, leaving only a small garrison in Vienna, consisting of 11,000 soldiers and 5,000 militias. On June 14, 1683, the Ottoman army, as well as the allied armies of the Crimean Tatars, the Wallachian and Moldavian principalities, together with the army of Emmerich Thököly, reached the outskirts of Vienna. In total, the Ottomans had at their disposal from 150 to 175,000 soldiers, including 12,000 janissaries. The Grand Vizier immediately sent an ultimatum to the defenders of the city demanding to capitulate, but when he was refused, he ordered to begin shelling the city fortifications. The defenders of the city also responded with massive artillery fire. To avoid unnecessary losses during the assault on the city, the Grand Vizier ordered his men to dig trenches in the direction of the city walls. Vienna had impressive fortifications that were almost impossible to take by direct assault. Therefore, the Ottomans, having set up a camp, began a full-fledged siege of the city. The Ottoman army cut off all supply routes to Vienna, depriving its garrison of the opportunity to replenish food supplies. The mine war began. Ottoman miners began to dig tunnels to undermine the city's fortifications. In turn, the defenders of the city hastily dug counter-tunnels to prevent the enemy from destroying the walls and bastions. Time passed and food supplies in the city began to run out, but the garrison of Vienna continued to resist. Nevertheless, by the end of August, the position of the Vienna garrison became critical, but help was already close. On September 6, 1683, John Sobieski, the Polish king and concurrently the Grand Duke of Lithuania, together with his army crossed the Danube 30 kilometers from Vienna near the city of Tulln, where he joined up with the main forces of the Allies. John Sobieski had at his disposal about 26,000 soldiers, which included 3 brigades of winged hussars and 3 brigades of light cavalry. The Austrian army under the command of Charles V, which on the eve managed to defeat the army of Emmerich Thököly 5 kilometers northeast of Vienna, consisted of 18,000 soldiers, including 8,000 horsemen. Also in the vicinity of Tulna was the 20,000th Bavarian army under the command of Prince George Friedrich of Waldeck, which consisted mainly of infantry, and the Saxon army under the command of the Elector of Saxony, Johann George III, which consisted of 9,000 soldiers, including 2,000 horsemen. Thus, the Allies managed to gather about 85,000 soldiers near Vienna, which was a very impressive force in the period under review. In order to prevent the Ottomans from capturing Vienna and hiding behind its walls, the Allies acted swiftly. According to the plan drawn up, the Allies were to cross the Vienna forest and attack the Ottoman camp, thus lifting the siege of Vienna. Already on September 11th, the Allied detachments crossed the Vienna woods, planning to launch an attack on the Ottoman camp the next morning. The Allies divided their forces into 4 parts. The Austrian infantry under the command of Charles V was located on the left flank, the Bavarian and Saxon detachments were located in the center, and the Polish army occupied the right flank. The entire Allied cavalry, led personally by John Sobieski, was located on a hill and was supposed to deliver a decisive blow. In turn, Kara Mustafa Pasha did not wait for the enemy to attack. Instead, he left about 15,000 of his soldiers in position, and ordered the rest of the army to attack the enemy, planning to take him by surprise. In the first line, the Ottoman cavalry attacked, which counted on the effect of surprise, but when they reached the enemy positions, they were met with dense rifle and artillery fire. Stopping the attack of the Ottoman cavalry and throwing it away from their positions, the Allied infantry went on the offensive. After some time, the Austrian infantry, advancing on the left flank, reached the enemy positions and began to push him. The Bavarians and Saxons advancing in the center also reached the ranks of the Ottoman infantry and started a battle. Meanwhile, the offensive of the Austrian army stopped near the village of Nussdorf, where the fortified positions of the Janissaries were located. The Bavarian and Saxon infantry had a more successful offensive, as they managed to push the enemy back from their positions. Fearing a strike by the Bavarian and Saxon infantry in the rear, the right flank of the Ottoman army was also forced to retreat and Nussdorf fell into the hands of the Austrian army. Austrian, Saxon and Bavarian troops were able to penetrate deeply into the orders of the Ottoman army, which created the danger that the Ottomans would attack them from the flank. The fact is that the Polish infantry, which had to overcome a long distance to the positions of the enemy, still did not enter the battle. Toward noon, the Polish infantry appeared on the battlefield, which, having formed combat formations, was rapidly approaching the enemy positions. At this time, the Crimean Tatar cavalry tried to attack the flank of the advancing Polish infantry, but was met with dense rifle fire. Having come under massive fire, the Tatar cavalry stopped the attack and hastily left the battlefield. Meanwhile, the Polish infantry, having reached the enemy positions, began to push him and thereby level the front line. The battle lasted almost all day. All this time, the Allied cavalry stood on the hill without engaging in battle. According to the plan drawn up earlier, the attack was to continue in the morning of the next day, but John Sobieski, inspired by the successes of the Allied army, ordered his cavalry to immediately begin the offensive. About 20,000 horsemen with winged hussars in the forefront launched a swift attack from the top of the hill. Very soon, the horsemen reached the Ottoman troops, which were battered by the battle that lasted all day. The attack of the cavalry overturned the left flank of the Ottoman army, which began to flee. The rest of the Ottoman army, led by the Grand Vizier, ran after him. The Ottoman camp fell into the hands of the Allies. After defeating the Ottoman army near Vienna, the Holy Roman Empire began preparing for its own offensive, and the Ottoman Grand Vizier Kara Mustafa Pasha was executed by order of the Sultan. In 1684, the Holy League was formed, which, in addition to Austria, included Venice, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth and the Tsardom of Russia. After completing preparations in 1684, the Austrian army launched an offensive in Hungary. Rapidly advancing, the Austrian army was able to capture the cities of Visegrad and Vac and, having reached the outskirts of Buda, began to lay siege to the city. In turn, the Ottomans, having gathered their strength, tried to counterattack in order not to allow the enemy to capture Buda. The Ottoman army managed to regain control of the city of Vac, but could not continue the offensive. At the same time, the Republic of Venice entered the war against the Ottoman Empire. The Venetian army launched a military campaign whose goal was to establish control over Morea, because of which the Ottomans had to transfer part of their forces to protect the peninsula. On September 2, 1684, the Austrians managed to establish control over the city of Buda, and the Ottoman army was forced to retreat to the vicinity of Belgrade. Taking advantage of the retreat of the enemy, the Austrian army began to establish control over the cities of Hungary. In addition, the Austrians managed to take some castles in Transylvania. The situation for the Ottoman Empire was critical, because of which the Sultan tried to start peace negotiations, but Leopold I refused to make peace. In 1686, the Tsardom of Russia declared war on the Ottoman Empire and began preparations for a campaign deep into the Crimean Peninsula. Thus, the Ottomans lost the opportunity to attract additional forces of the Crimean Tatars for the war in Hungary, since the Tatars needed to protect their lands from the Tsardom of Russia. In April 1687, an Austrian army of about 60,000 soldiers under the command of Charles V of Lorraine began to move along the Danube River, planning to reach the Osijek fortress and capture it. Having learned about these plans, the commander of the Ottoman army, Sari Suleiman Pasha, decided to take up defense near the fortress. Thus, when the Austrian army reached the vicinity of the fortress, they found the 80,000th Ottoman army, which managed to prepare defensive positions. The armies of the opponents were separated by the Drava River. Knowing about the numerical advantage of the enemy, the Austrians did not dare to immediately force the river. An artillery exchange of fire began, which continued for quite some time. Only at the end of July, having pushed back the Ottoman troops, the Austrians were able to occupy a bridgehead on the opposite bank of the river. While exploiting their success in attacking the enemy camp, they did not dare. A few days after occupying the bridgehead, Charles V gave his army the order to begin a retreat. In turn, the Grand Vizier decided that the morale of the enemy was broken and ordered his army to begin the pursuit. The Austrian army, pursued by the Ottomans, retreated to the vicinity of Mohacs, where they took up fortified positions and prepared for the upcoming battle. The battle took place on August 12, 1687. As a result of a bloody battle, the Austrians managed to defeat the Ottoman army and put it to flight. The convoy and the treasury of the Ottoman army fell into the hands of the Austrians. Despite a serious defeat, the Grand Vizier managed to restore order in his army and begin a retreat towards Petrovaradin, planning to cross the Danube and take the fortress by storm. During the crossing of the Ottoman army across the Danube, a storm broke out due to which the Ottomans suffered losses. The remnants of the Ottoman army rebelled and advanced towards Constantinople to convey their complaints to the Sultan. Having reached the capital of the Ottoman Empire, the army overthrew Mehmed IV and made Suleiman II the new Sultan. Since the main Ottoman forces left Hungary, the Austrians began to establish control over the Ottoman fortresses, which were defended by a few garrisons. The new Sultan, realizing that his situation was rapidly deteriorating, tried to start peace negotiations, but Leopold I did not plan to abandon the further offensive. On September 8, 1688, the Austrian army managed to establish control over Belgrade and thereby open a direct road to Constantinople. The Ottoman capital was under threat, but King Louis of France came to the aid of the Sultan. His army invaded the Kirkfalls. Thus, Leopold I urgently needed strength to fight the French, and therefore he was forced to agree to peace negotiations with the Sultan. This was the end of the first stage of the Great Turkish War. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe to my channel and click on the bell so as not to miss new videos.